Buenos días a todos. Iniciamos los trabajos de esta sesión. Se trata de una taller, conferencia sobre la publicación de artículos en revistas especializadas. Nos acompaña ahora el
licenciado Sergio Zepeda.
El licenciado Sergio Zepeda, que nos va a dar una bienvenida. Enseguida presentaré a la doctora Rachel y luego ella se quedará con el micrófono para compartir con nosotros el trabajo sobre la publicación de artículos en revistas especializadas.
Muy brevemente, quiero darles la bienvenida y las gracias por asistir a este taller. A nombre de Cambridge University Press y de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, muchas gracias por asistir. Este taller lo pensamos para estudiantes de posgrado, investigadores que apenas empiezan su carrera o que ya han publicado algunos artículos, pero están en sus inicios. Rachel, digamos, tiene mucha experiencia como editora, como autora, y bueno, el doctor podrá platicarles un poco más al respecto de ella.
Bueno, gracias. Este taller forma parte de las actividades que realiza la biblioteca desde hace varios años para la formación de usuarios de los recursos electrónicos de información. Entre otras actividades, la biblioteca participa cada año en el curso de formación de profesores con un módulo sobre herramientas de investigación para el uso de los recursos electrónicos de información de la biblioteca digital de la UNAM. También participa en el taller como prerequisito en el programa de posgrado en lingüística, a donde asisten todos los estudiantes que se inscriben cada año, en cada convocatoria en el posgrado de lingüística. Adicionalmente, tiene algunas acciones en universidades y en escuelas de lenguas, facultades de lenguas de universidades públicas del país, a donde nos invitan para compartir este tipo de experiencias. Hoy, y desde hace algunos 3-4 años, hemos hecho este tipo de eventos como este taller para acercarnos al público más específico, que son los estudiantes de posgrado y los profesores e investigadores que publican o que pretenden publicar en revistas de alto ranking en el área de la lingüística y de las ciencias sociales. En esta ocasión nos acompaña la doctora Rachel Sieder. Ella es profesora investigadora del Centro de Investigaciones y Estudios Superiores de Antropología Social, el CIESAS, en la Ciudad de México desde 2007, e investigadora asociada en el Centro CRH. Sí, el Michelson Institute en Bergen, Noruega, en el Instituto para las Américas y en el Instituto de Estudios de las Américas de la Universidad de Londres. Ella tiene una maestría en el Instituto en Estudios Latinoamericanos y un doctorado en Ciencia Política en la Universidad de Londres. Sus áreas puntuales de investigación incluyen derechos humanos, derechos indígenas, movimientos sociales, antropología jurídica, Estado y violencia. Pero algo que es muy destacable e importante señalar aquí, durante 9 años fue miembro del Consejo Editorial Internacional, fundadora, editora del Journal of Latin American Studies de Cambridge University Press y Latin American and Caribbean Ethnic Studies también de Cambridge University Press, ¿no? De otra compañía. Okay. Actualmente coordina desde el CIESAS un proyecto de investigación colectiva, Mujeres Indígenas y Acceso a la Seguridad y Justicia en América Latina. Entre muchas otras publicaciones, ha publicado, por ejemplo, Gender Justice and Legal Pluralities en Latin American and African Perspectives. En fin, autoridad, autonomía y derecho indígena en la Guatemala de la posguerra, y otras publicaciones importantes desde 2010 hasta 2013 aproximadamente. No. Ok. Bueno, dejamos la palabra a la doctora. Este taller, esta conferencia se transmite por el canal de YouTube del CELE y esperemos nos estén viendo. Les damos la bienvenida también a las personas que nos escuchan y nos ven desde fuera del campus de Ciudad Universitaria.
Pues,
Gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias, doctor Jesús, muchas gracias, Sergio, por la invitación a estar aquí con ustedes hoy. Pues es un gran gusto estar aquí. Voy a saludar primero en mi lengua adoptada, local, pero me habían pedido hacer el taller en inglés, en mi lengua materna, ¿verdad? So I'm going to make the switch into English and hope that everybody is okay with English, that you're expecting me to do this whole workshop in English. But if I am going too fast, if there's anything that anyone's struggling, then just please put your hand up as I'm going. Before I start and tell you a little bit about myself and maybe why I've been invited to talk to you about publishing in index journals, particularly in English, which is what I'm mainly going to talk to you about today. Can I just ask how many people here are currently doing a postgraduate degree? Okay, about a quarter of you, yeah? And how many people are working as academics, members of staff? Okay. How many, thank you, how many people have published in English? Okay. In journals? Okay, thanks. And can I ask how many social scientists? Okay, and humanities, Lenguas? Okay, good. I will tell you a little bit about what my experience is as an editor, and maybe that will help also for you to understand kind of where I'm coming from with my comments about publishing. As Jesús said, I edited for 9 years the Journal of Latin American Studies, which is published by Cambridge University Press, which is one of the top-ranking interdisciplinary journals of Latin American studies. Maybe some of you know it. It doesn't publish literature. It's social sciences, humanities, history, often thought of as a history journal, but actually it publishes across the social sciences. So 9 years of editing a journal. Always there were 2 or 3 editors. So that gave me quite a lot of experience about what editors are looking for when we receive your article submissions. So that's kind of, although I publish, I'm obviously an academic like many of you in the room, and I have to publish just like all of you in the room will have to publish, or are publishing or have to publish or hope to publish. And just because I edited a journal doesn't mean that I always get my work published and accepted, first of all, too. So, you know, there's 2 ways of looking at it, from as an editor, but also as an academic trying to publish. The first thing I want to say, and when Sergio asked me to do the talk, he asked me to think about it for people who were in their postgraduate degrees, maybe getting ready to publish or starting to publish. But I think actually, having had 25 odd years in academia, the point still stands for me today, which is decide on a publication strategy and stick to it. And that means thinking about it in terms of your time. It means thinking about it in terms of when you're going to go on the job market if you're in a postgraduate study. For those of us that are employed in Mexican institutions and are in the national system of researchers, the SNI, we have to think about our publishing in terms of when we're going to be evaluated. And that means not thinking about it the year before you're going to be evaluated, but thinking about it 4 years before you're going to be evaluated. Because what I will tell you about the length of time that it takes to get published in high-ranking index journals is that you really need to think about a publication strategy over a number of years. Yeah. And block out your time as well for when you will have time to write these articles, because we all have lots of wonderful ideas about the fantastic material that we have and the articles that we want to write, but usually we're all over-ambitious about what we can actually deliver, or we get sidetracked. Yeah? So we say, okay, this year I'm going to publish one article, I'm going to submit one article to this journal, and then there's conferences and people say, oh, just write a chapter for a book, and things pile up, and the main objective that you had about publishing in that journal, which is really difficult to publish in, sometimes you put to one side because there are other offers that are easier to publish or more immediate to publish, and that's where planning your time comes in. So deciding on a publication strategy and sticking to the publication strategy is very important. What are the expectations of the job market that you're going to be aiming at? Where are they expecting you to publish? Often postgraduate students that I talk to don't necessarily know this. They know they're expected to publish, they know they're expected to publish in index journals, they maybe don't have a sense of what the ranking system is of the index journals. And many institutions, not so much in Latin America yet, but certainly I'm from England, as you might tell from my accent, but in many European institutions, they have different rankings of the journals inside the institutions, right? So if I'm, as I used to be, a member of staff at what's now University College, and I say to my head of department, they want me to publish in this journal. And he says, no, you can't publish in that journal because it's a B-ranked journal or it's a C-ranked journal, and we only want A and B-ranked journals. So you have to try and publish it somewhere else, right? So try and work out, get information from your colleagues, from other tenured academics if you're looking for jobs. What kind of places should I be publishing in? What are they expecting to see, right? Having sat on a number of tenure committees over my years, I can tell you that one good journal article publication in a really top-ranked journal that we all know is very difficult to publish in is more impressive on a CV than 20 things that I perhaps don't know the publication. It's not to say that the work isn't good, and it's not to say, of course, that a tenure committee doesn't read your work. But if you get it published in a really good journal, that stays on your CV for your whole life, right? So that is the other thing. The second thing I would say about publication strategy is aim high. Aim high, be realistic, right? You know, if you're in your second year of your PhD in history, you're unlikely to get your work published in the Hispanic American Historical Review straight away. Right? It's the top journal. It's difficult to publish in, but that doesn't mean that when you finished your PhD and when you're honing your work, you shouldn't aim for the best journals. Right? Aim high first, and then you're going to have to. We all do adjust, right? If we don't get accepted in the top journal that we want, but there's no reason that you shouldn't have high ambitions for your work when you've dedicated your life and so many years to your research. So don't undersell your research. That's what I'm always telling my PhD students, is that as a PhD student, you are a resource that everybody that publishes wants, right? Because you had 4 years you have lots of data, and you haven't started publishing yet. So everybody, if your work is good, will want you to publish in edited collections, for example, right? And I'm very much in favor of edited collections, good edited collections, edited books. But the the reality these days of getting tenure in academia is that you need journal articles, and journal articles are usually more highly evaluated than chapters in edited collections. It depends on the edited collection. If it's, you know, with an illustrious press like Cambridge University Press and it's edited by the top person in your field, then obviously that's, you know, a great place to publish. But I say this because publishing articles in journals is hard. It's harder than publishing in books. But if you are in a PhD or straight out of a PhD, you know, you have hugely valuable resource that you deserve, you know. Sorry, I lost the English there, but that you know, for yourself, you owe it to yourself. Sorry, that was what I was looking for. You owe it to yourself to aim high and to try and publish in the best places possible. Something I'm often asked for journal articles is, what should I publish from my thesis? If I'm working on my thesis, how much of my thesis can I publish as articles, as chapters? There are copyright issues, obviously, about that. It depends on what kind of thesis you're writing. Some theses you can publish parts of as articles as you're going along, as you're actually writing the thesis. And you might actually plan the writing of the thesis like that. It's a good strategy if it's the kind of PhD that works with, right? If you're a historian and, you know, a year you're going to be in the archives, and another year or more you're going to be analyzing your data, and then you're starting writing, and maybe the whole thing needs to be written before the key analytical lines really are clear to you, then it's harder to publish as you go along. So it depends a lot on the kind of thesis. But increasingly there is emphasis and pressure on academics that are, or students, postgraduate students in their doctorates, to publish a journal article, at least one, while they're doing their PhD. Or certainly when they're in the first year of a postdoc. So you should be thinking about articles as you're writing your PhD thesis, not start thinking about that afterwards. If you're aiming, which most of you will be aiming, to publish your PhD as a monograph, a lot of you will publish as a book, hopefully, then the standard rule is that you can publish 2 chapters as journal articles, but not lots more. It depends how many chapters your thesis has, but let's say your thesis is 5 chapters. You cannot publish 4 of those 5 chapters as journal articles, even though they're going to be in slightly different form, and then expect that somebody's going to give you a book contract because there will be copyright issues, right? Or because your work's already out there, so what's the benefit for certainly a commercial press of publishing your work? So think about those things too, and definitely take copyright very seriously. What normally happens these days, certainly in Britain and the States, is that somebody will finish their PhD, they maybe will have published 1 article, maybe publish another in the immediate year or 2 afterwards, and then they'll be working on their thesis as a book, they'll try and get a book contract, and then you've often seen it in books where the acknowledgements will say, Chapter 2 was formally published, was previously, a previous version of Chapter 2 was published in Hispanic American Historical Review or Journal of Latin American Caribbean Anthropology. And that's with a process that the authors have gone through where they've asked for copyright release to the journal that published their article first. Right? So copyright is very important. I've said this, I'll say it again. Only accept publication offers that are part of your publication strategy. That doesn't mean your publication strategy is to say, okay, I'm only going to publish in the American Political Science Review and nowhere else, right? Because then you won't have a publishing strategy, right? Because if you're hugely lucky, you will get published there, but it's very difficult to publish in those top journals, so you need a publishing strategy that says, okay, these are the 5 journals, 6 journals that I think it would be good to publish in. And I think it would be good to have maybe one book chapter, right? And the kind of collection that I would like to see myself published in is this, right? Because often for special issues or for edited collections, book collections, those invitations come from when you're presenting your work. You go to conferences, somebody will hear it and say, that's fantastic, that's exactly the kind of person we want for this initiative or that. And if that's part of your publication strategy, right, then good. Yeah, that doesn't mean that you can't accept offers that you didn't know were going to be there at the beginning when you wrote your publication strategy, but you need to have a strategy. So think about what kind of edited collections, which journals or which editorials you particularly like, right? I had to do a very vicious cull of all my books when I moved to Mexico because it was so expensive to ship them all. And it was interesting to me, the ones that I brought, when I looked at who were the publishers. And often, you know, I'm not going to say who the publishing houses were, but there were like 4 or 5 that I definitely, most of my collection of books were from, right? What does that say to me? Those are who I read, and that's who I'd like to be publishing with. Exposure of your work. Conferences are terribly important for that. One of the books that I edited with Palgrave Press a few years ago was on the judicialization of politics in Latin America, and putting together the authors for that book. Part of what I did with my co-editors was scout, went to look at conferences, went to panels, looked at the titles, looked at who was presenting, and found at least one colleague whose work I had not known about before, who was in the early stages of his career, who I invited to a conference which then turned into a book. And he's a colleague that I've now worked with for 15 years because I heard him give a stellar, fantastic conference paper that happened to fit with what I was looking for and my colleagues were looking for as an initiative. So conferences are really important. And I mean, you all know which are the important conferences for your disciplines. And if you're a graduate student, you need to give a really good paper because that's when you're showcasing your work, right? And people will hear it. And journal editors also hear it. I still go, not every year now, but to the Latin American Studies Association conference, which is the North American Association of Latin Americanists. We used to do a panel with all of the journal editors of Latin American studies, this kind of thing, but with 9 or 10 of us. And I can tell you that all of us as editors are walking around conferences thinking, maybe that would be good as an article. If you hear, we're scouting for papers and going to listen to who's new, who's good. We're also asking our colleagues, you know, about good PhD students coming up. So take conferences seriously because they're really important for publishing. Book reviews on your topics of expertise as well in good journals are good things to do, right? They're a lot of work to do a good book review, and that's why editors ask good postgraduate students to do them, because you generally take them more seriously and have more time than your older academic colleagues. But that's a way also of getting your name known, right? If you write an interesting review on a book that's come out, an important book in your field, then, you know, Paramilitarismo in Colombia by Aldo Civico, whose book's just come out. If you're working on paramilitarism in Mexico and you write an interesting review on that, then your name will stick in my head as a journal editor, as somebody who works on paramilitarism in Latin America. And then when I have something that comes up that I may want to review of an article, or if your work comes to me, I'll think, oh yeah, I saw that person's name and it was a good review. Yeah. So book reviews also important. Working papers, personal websites, academia, edu, and other networking websites, right? Increasingly our work is out there on the web more and more. There's a question often if you're, say you're in an institution and you publish a working paper and you have it up on the institutional website as a working paper, then you may want to submit it to a journal as an article. That's fine. That's normal practice. Once it's accepted for publication, you take it down normally from the website, right? Or have to add something in very large letters that says a subsequent version of this article will be published, is forthcoming in the Journal of Latin American Studies. And then when it's published by the Journal of Latin American Studies, it should not be on a website. But working papers many institutions do this, and it's a good way of getting your work circulated before it's actually formally published. Your personal websites as well. Many of you have that, or have something like Academia Edu, where you can post your published papers. Those are all good things to do. And non-academic publishing as well. I know I've been invited here to talk about journal publishing, but not all publication, not all of the things we want to say necessarily need to go through that kind of rigorous, peer-reviewed, lengthy process that an academic article does. There may be other things, other ways of getting your research out, radio shows, blogs, more journalistic publishing, what generally tends to get referred to as difusión in Spanish, and that, you know, publicizing your work is very important. I've just come back from sabbatical home. My original home in England, home here now. But my elder colleagues were telling me that they're now expected to have Twitter, and they have to be posting blogs, and you know, if they're not posting and they're not doing Facebook networking and they're not tweeting every day about their research, then the head of department wants to know why their Twitter is inactive. So, you know, it sounds like a great tyranny to me, and I personally can't read that many tweets a day, but these things are becoming, certainly for those of you that are younger, more and more expected of academics, right? That you publicize your own work constantly. Well, we can like it or like it less, but it is now part of the expectation of the job. So that kind of block is the first thing, and I'll just say again, decide on a publication strategy and stick to it. It's important. Have it above your desk, right? Stick it on the wall above your desk, and check in with it regularly to see if you're meeting your targets, and if they were over ambitious to start with, then you're going to have to adjust them, but you do need to have a strategy, and a strategy that you know is going to take years, right? Because the average time for a top ranking journal between when you submit and when you're published, when I left as editor, which is now 9 years ago, was 18 months to 2 years. Right? Now it's longer. So 2.5 years, sometimes 3, right, to publish in one of the top-ranking journals in many fields. Okay, so for PhD students, you know, if you're going to need publications when you're coming out of your degree, then you need to be thinking, yeah, when am I going to submit? And you can't think, all right, I finished my PhD, I'll submit, I'll get published within 6 months and someone will give me a job on the strength of that article, because it doesn't work like that. The same with us, of those of us that are in evaluation systems, where people are expecting you to publish and you have to have it in print by a certain time. That means you need to think about submitting 2 years, maybe longer, ahead of when you need the thing to be in print. Good. Are there any, should I take questions as I go along, or do you want me to just continue? Is everyone happy for me to continue? Yeah? Is everyone okay with my English? Yeah? Okay, good. Feels very strange being in the UNAM and doing something in English. But, okay, the second thing that I think is key advice on publishing journals is map the field of journals, right, that are important for your discipline. You probably know them already, but you should definitely have them presente. Which are the key journals in your area? Make a list. Read the journals. Who are the editors? Who's on the advisory board? Read those things. That tells you lots about the directions of the journals. What kind of articles have they published lately? I know that we, as readers these days, we often don't think of journals, right? Because we look for articles, we find them on the web, we download one, we download another, right? We very rarely sit with the journal issue in our hands, okay? I can tell you as an editor from the other side, I'm always thinking about the issue of the journal, right? I'm thinking about how a journal, how its identity is projected in the in the world. What kind of articles do I want to be publishing as an editor? What kind of articles are going to signal, right, that we take a particular, we're interested in a particular set of debates, particular perspectives, maybe certain topics. When I was editing the Journal of Latin American Studies, there were very few sociologists working on Latin America. Lots of anthropologists, lots of geographers, lots of political scientists, but sociologists much less than there used to be kind of when I was a student. So we were always very keen when really good pieces of sociology came our way. So sometimes editors will be looking to strengthen a particular discipline if they're a multidisciplinary journal. You can't possibly know all of these things, right? As people, you know, as authors submitting journals, but do take time to get a sense of what the identity of the journal that you want to publish in is, right? So for example, sometimes things if you read the first page of the Journal of Latin American Studies, it said we publish in this discipline. We publish cultural studies. We do not publish literature. Right? We would reject always every intake some articles that were literature articles that they'd got sent to us, which was a huge waste of time for the author and a huge waste of time for us, and it was just because they hadn't read the description of what articles the journal was looking for. So do take time to research the journals. Obviously, most of you are trying to publish in disciplinary journals, but also in interdisciplinary journals, right? You will probably all, if you're in a discipline, say you're in anthropology as I now am, I have a very clear sense of what the key disciplinary journals are in anthropology, but I may not have a sense of all the other interdisciplinary journals that I could think about publishing in, right? So for example, I do law and anthropology, right? And I publish in law journals and anthropology journals. So that means I have to have a map in my head of which are the kind of law journals. Obviously, there are a minority of law journals, but that publish social science research. There are other kinds of international studies interdisciplinary journals that I might publish in. And again, you need to be clear of what the rankings are of all of them. Most of the journals on their websites tell you what their ranking is, yeah? And you can be revising them in the ranking indexes. So, you know, which indexes, what ranking, more and more that information is out there. It's something that all journals use to sell themselves, but you need to be doing the homework on it, and indeed asking. Yeah, I think it's good to, I mean, I would love to do this kind of workshop with CONACYT, for example, to see exactly what CONACYT are expecting in terms of index journals, right? I know when I started here, I think, you know, you just filled in indexed journal, yeah. Now they expect you to put the indexes where that journal appears, but these kind of things are very important for all of us to know, because, you know, of the decisions that we have to make about where to try and publish. Okay, so mapping the journal field, that's the second point that I would like to leave you with. And it's important. Go to the library, find the journal, take it down, have a look at it, have a look at the last 5 years of it, see what's published. Many also of the, in fact, all of the top-ranking journals in the States, they tend to move after a number of years from one editorial team to another, and sometimes they will move from one university to another. And that may signal that there's been a change of editorial direction, right? Not 180 degrees, because no journal that's, you know, a top-ranking journal is going to want to do that, but they may want to subtly tweak, right? And that might mean that, for example, if they've not published very much on gender issues, they might want to publish more on that, and they might take a few, you know, publish a few articles at the same time, and that's a strong signal then to us as a readership, because if you're working on gender and you come across those articles in that journal, you might not have had that journal on your radar, and then you'll think, oh, okay, yeah, they published a couple of things I really liked, I might try and publish in that journal. Yeah. So getting a sense of the journals is important. The third thing I would say about preparing to publish in journals is just that, preparing, right? And that goes with your publication strategy. Sketch out paper outlines and key arguments. Yeah? Kind of, it's almost like having a filing cabinet, right? Where you say, okay, article in the first drawer is going to be about this, and this is the data that I'm collecting that will help me in the writing of that article. Yeah? And the second article that I want to publish is going to have this central argument. Right? I think it's probably good advice to say, don't try and encapsulate your entire thesis in one article. Yeah. You may and you will have had to argue that there's one central argument in your thesis, right? And certainly if you're going to sell it as a book, you have to be able to pitch it like that. But you will be able to publish more, obviously, from a thesis than just one article, right? So what arguments would you be making when you're thinking of sketching it out? Which sets of debates are you speaking to? Yeah? What literature are you engaging with? Where is your contribution to a particular field. Right? And it may be that a journal article that you publish is not necessarily central to your PhD thesis, but that you're putting your research in dialogue with another literature. I'll give you an example. I work on indigenous justice and on women's representations of justice, right? So on pluriculturalism and justice systems, right? And I'm in the process of publishing something which is in dialogue with a literature which is about parity in electoral systems. Right? So about indigenous women's representation, what's the best way to get greater voice for indigenous women? Should it be through reforming the electoral system and giving them parity? Is it about changing usos y costumbres and local customary justice systems? Now, I don't work on parity. I don't work on electoral systems, but I'm publishing something that's in dialogue with a set of debates on which there's a lot published and which I've had to read quite a lot about, but which is not my main area of speciality, right? So I give you as an example to think about, okay, who am I wanting to debate with? Because that will help you define the article, right? Think also about length requirements, and that goes back to mapping the fields of journals. Some journal articles are 7,000 words now. The Journal of Latin American Studies average was about 12,000 words. Right? There's a huge difference between a 7,000 and a 12,000 word article, right? In terms of how much evidence can you bring to bear? It's very difficult for anthropologists. My colleagues hate it that the journals are getting, the article requirements, word requirements are getting shorter and shorter, because it's very difficult to map out really rich, deep ethnography in something that's very short. It tends to be just, you know, flechazos of, which is not to say that that's not a valid way of writing an article, but that you need to think about, okay, what kind of evidence am I putting out here? Who am I wanting to debate with? And very much think about the length, right, of the article too. It's kind of, it's a slow drip of information from your main body of work. How do you demonstrate your knowledge of a field? Because you must demonstrate your knowledge of the field. When you're putting your article together, you've got to demonstrate it to the editors, and you will certainly have to demonstrate it to whoever is reviewing your article for a journal. Right? That doesn't mean you have to be taxonomic about a field. It doesn't mean that we expect in a journal article the kind of literature review that you normally do expect in a PhD. Yeah? So how are you condensing your knowledge of a field, and how are you angling your knowledge of a field in order to put forward a certain set of arguments? With these sketches that you have, which all of us have as academics, we've always got a set of ideas of articles that we think we would like to write. Yeah? Be working on them. Develop them as conference papers. Give them as conference papers. Get feedback from people on them. All of this is prior to developing them for submission as a journal article, right? It's really useful to give things as a conference paper and get feedback from people, to ask people for recommendations of literature. If somebody kind of says, well, you know, I didn't like how you presented this because I think you ignored all of this literature on that, then go up to them afterwards, even if you hated their comments, and say, recommend me what I should read. Yeah? You think I left something out? Okay, what should I be reading to fill in this gap? Yeah? Because it may be the same person who rejects your article because you didn't reference those things, right? You can't reference everything, but you certainly need to convince the experts in your field, and many of you will be experts in your field, I imagine, looking around the room, but you need to convince them that you are knowledgeable about the field and that you have something new to offer the field. Those of you that are postgraduate students, do ask your supervisors to read your draft articles. And supervisors should read their students' work, not just their draft chapters, but also help them to get published. I mean, that's a key part of our role as academics, is to help younger colleagues and students develop their career. So do ask your supervisor. I hope you all trust your supervisors. But do ask them to read a draft article, or maybe publish something with them. And one of the first things I published was with my supervisor. It was a nightmare in the writing because we both have very different writing styles, but it was very instructive process to do. And obviously, you know, it's a clear signal to people who don't know you, what you're working on, who you're working with. So other colleagues you trust, right? Show your work to people you trust. Yeah. I was surprised when I did this workshop. I did it last year, also in another part of the UNAM, and one of the concerns that many of the students were asking me about was about plagiarism. They were really, really, really concerned about plagiarism and said, you know, how can I guarantee that if I submit an article to a journal, it's not going to end up published with somebody else's name on it? Which I was quite horrified about, because, you know, if you're sending to bona fide journals, that does not happen. Some of the students said that what they did was actually go and registered their article with copyright, the Copyright Office, before they sent it out. Perhaps, yeah. Plagiarism does happen, as we know. We have some very illustrious examples of it here in Mexico and elsewhere. And there's been a huge debate recently, of course, about plagiarism in academia. In terms of publishing, I would say, yeah, you know, show your work to people you trust. Make sure that, you know, actually by giving things at conferences, by publishing working papers, and ultimately by publishing journal articles, that is a way of setting your intellectual property rights on your own work. Right? Also, you know, there's never anything that is exclusively 100% original ours, because we're always in debate with each other, right? That's what academia is about. That's what thinking is about. But it's certainly an issue, and we can discuss more questions around plagiarism if people are concerned about it, maybe in the Q&A. So, third thing then, preparing, right? Preparing, sketching out, having articles that you're thinking about, working on. It's, you know, I think the thing that I would emphasize is that it's a long process to work up a good journal article, yeah? It's not that you finish your PhD and then you think, okay, I'm going to bang out a journal article in the next 2 weeks. You know, it's an intellectual process that should take time, and it will show in your work. Submitting, right? Just to tell you that I will talk about submitting. I'll say something more about translation and about the process from the editor's side and how to read the reviews when you get reviews. But submitting. Submitting has to be your best writing ever. Right? Has to be polished. It has to include the key references in your field and the thing that you are writing about, right? It has to meet the length requirements of the journal, right? It's no good sending me something that's 5,000 words if everything I publish is 12,000 words. Do follow the style guide, yeah? Maybe not, it's not so important in the first submission, okay? So my journal, for example, which was published in, well, it's actually published in New York and Cambridge, but we always insisted on English spelling, right, which of course all my North American colleagues went crazy with, because, you know, we spell labor L-A-B-O-U-R, and in the States it's L-A-B-O-R. It didn't matter if something came in American spelling at a first submission, right? If we accepted it and we were going to publish it, then yes, it did have to come back in the style that the journal insisted on. I published an interdisciplinary journal on Latin American studies. I always looked extremely suspiciously at any journal article submission that came that only had references in English. How are you going to write about Peronism if you're not reading what's published in Spanish on Peronism, for example? But in an interdisciplinary journal like that, published in English, we expected references from the Spanish literature, the Portuguese literature, the English literature. So no, you know, publishing in another language is about knowing what are the key references in your debates. And also, I would argue, making an argument that good work, certainly in Latin America, should be referenced and should be debated within those journals. Part of what I spend a lot of my time doing is publishing the work that I do and that my colleagues at CSS and in my research team do in English, because I am fed up of seeing the same topics published about that don't reference properly the good work that gets done by stellar academics in Latin America. And that's a problem that we have about getting our work out there. And if you publish in a journal article, the exposure you get from a good journal article, thousands and thousands of hits, and people will read your article, right? It's out there on the web, compared to if you publish it in a very nice edited book collection, but that the editors or the publishing house just don't promote, right? So it sits in a basement somewhere, right? The difference is huge, huge in terms of the exposure of your work. I mean, the stuff that I see referenced of mine, 9 times out of 10, it's because it was in an internationally published journal, or because I published something with Cambridge University Press in a book, for example, who are very good, I might add, at publicizing their books. So, sorry, I digress a bit, but it needs to be your most polished writing. It needs to follow the style guide. It needs to be careful on the referencing. Do not ever, ever, ever submit sloppy text. Never, right? You know, the worst thing for an editor is bad writing. One thing to say, often people think that in order to publish in English, you have to submit in English to start with, right? That's not always the case. Many of the interdisciplinary Latin Americanist journals accept and send out for referee articles in Spanish or in Portuguese, right? If then your article is accepted, of course, then it will have to be the final version of it translated into English. But I say this because it is a thing that stops many people whose first language is Spanish or Portuguese from sending their work to journals. They think, oh, you know, English, I can speak English, I can read English, but writing English is a struggle. I need to pay a huge amount of money to get somebody to help me translate it, you know, and that's a barrier to sending their work out to a journal. Now, if you sent it to the American Political Science Review, you would have to translate it into English before you sent it to them, because they don't read submissions in Spanish, as far as I know. But if you sent it to Latin American Research Review, Latin American Politics and Society, Journal of Latin American Studies, Hispanic American Historical Review, and it's in Spanish, that's fine. They'll send it to their referees, and their referees, most of them, will be able to read it, and they'll write their reference in English, but they'll read you in Spanish. So think about that, because, you know, that I think I've gathered that that's a huge barrier, and it shouldn't necessarily be. Depends on the journals you want to publish in. I know there are lots of linguists in the room, so this is probably very obvious to all of you, but a word about translation. Publishing in another language is much more than just about translating text. It's about understanding writing conventions. It's about understanding expectations. It's about understanding structures of argumentation. So when you take the journals and you're reading journal articles, I do this with my students. We'll read ethnography for the content, and then we'll read ethnography to see how it's actually structured, like a creative writing class, right? So do that with journal articles. My husband, who's not English, always goes crazy when I edit his work for publication in English, because I always reduce it by about 25%. I'm always insisting that in the first paragraph or two, he says what he's going to do in the article. Right? And that's not the convention that he grew up writing in, right? That, you know, you summarized everything in the first two paragraphs. Most journals ask you to write an abstract. Yeah? Writing the abstract is the hardest part of submitting a journal article, because you have to sum up your article in one paragraph. It's a very, very good exercise to do. So, you know, do it, redo it, hone it. But think about that, I would say, with writing conventions, yeah, and expectations, because you might have a beautiful, brilliant article in Spanish, and it will need more than just translating the text in order for it to be publishable, usually in another language, right, in English. That doesn't mean one is better than the other. It just means they're different in their conventions and what they're expecting. So when you're reading in the language that you're hoping to be publishing in, think about that. Think about how the articles are structured, right? It can be a bit of a tyranny. I have had one colleague who's a very successful colleague, I remember, submitted an article, which was a good article, to the journal that we published, but he just really, he wanted to do something more literary and less social sciencey, and it was an experimental piece, and the reviewers took it apart and said, you know, he hasn't referenced so-and-so, and he hasn't done this review of the literature that we would expect. And, you know, I sat down with him, actually, with the reviews, and he said, I'm not going to do it, you know. I'm bored of reading articles that are like that. I'm going to take it and publish somewhere else. And he did, and he could afford to do that because he was already a tenured professor. But if you are a graduate student and you're trying to get published, it's harder to ignore all of the conventions about structuring and how the kind of expectations of an article in a different language. It's hard for me. I publish more these days in the United States, and that's different from the expectations in Europe of publishing in English. It's becoming less so, but there are different conventions and different ways of writing. So think about that as you read and as you're writing yourselves. And for final translation, if you are lucky enough that your article is accepted after the review process, which I'll talk about next, it's normally your responsibility to get your work translated. What we used to do at the Journal of Latin American Studies was ask the authors to send us a test page of the translation. Right? Which I think is very good advice, so that, like, say I have an article that's been accepted and it was in Spanish, and there's a point at which I need to translate it into English, but I'm not so confident in English that I would do it myself, and I'm going to contract a translator to do it, and my English is okay, but not so good that I can tell if it's a really, really good translation. Then you can ask the editors or somebody else to look at that page of translation for you before you hand over your 10,000 pesos or 15,000 pesos or whatever it's going to cost you to pay a translator to do that. And, so, you know, translation's expensive. Good translation is expensive. As an editor, I have to say it was like pulling teeth with pliers sometimes to edit things that had been badly translated. I almost would have rather had the text in Spanish and translated it myself, and I usually did have to do that kind of thing when it was a really bad translation. So, good translation is difficult, and good translators are worth their weight in gold. But don't sell yourself. Don't hand your money over to somebody who's not going to do a good job on translation for you. Right? Take some time with that. Okay, you've written your article. You've polished it as much as you can. You're sick of it. You don't want to see it anymore. You send it off into the Scholars One system. Right now, most of the journals in English have this online submission system. How many people have used Scholars One here? Anybody? When you've published in English, those of you that have published in English, have you had to upload things onto a site? No? Okay. More and more the journals are, whereas journals used to have assistants and a direct, you would email a person, you would actually get a person at the end. There's still a person, but now they expect you to upload your article onto a site. The most known one is called Scholars One. Right? So you create a profile, you're uploading your abstract into it, you're uploading the main text of it, you have to make sure you anonymize it, of course, before you're uploading it. So have a look at those things as well, and we're all going to have to get used to them. I hated it when I was an editor. We went through the switch. Cambridge wanted us to move to Scholars One. That being England, we had a very old school way of doing it, where we would all write to everybody individually, and we cultivated relationships with a community of people, and people just don't have time to do that now. So they are making it more automated, and there are good things about having it automated too. It means tracking is easier. It's easier to keep the time. So your article has gone, right? You've sent it, you've uploaded it onto one of these sites. You want to know what's going to happen to it. You must be patient. It's the thing that I would underline, right? As I said, average submission to publication time in top-ranked journals is now over 2 years. Right? And for some journals, it's 3 years. Right? I've got 2 pieces coming out which I thought were going to be in print this year that I first submitted towards the end, I think November or December 2014. We're in 2016. And they're not going to be published until 2017. Right? It's taken that long for it to go through. As I said, having a publication strategy means that you need to calculate those times. Right? You can keep in touch with the editors once you've submitted, right? But do not send them emails every week asking when you're going to get a decision on your article. Most of these online systems do allow you to check the progress of your article. Right? So it will say submitted, out to reviewers, right? First reviews in. Some of them do that, not all of them do that. But I'll tell you a little bit about the process from the editor's side, right? So that I think it's useful to kind of understand what happens to your article when it goes into that void that you're waiting for it to be published. When I edited the Journal of Latin American Studies, we got about 140 to 160 submissions a year of articles, and we published 24. My colleagues who now edit the journal tell me the submission rates are double. So they're getting an article, 300 articles, nearly an article a day coming in. Right? And we still publish 24 articles a year. Okay. So what happens? We used to be 3 editors when I left. There was a time when everybody read everything, which was hugely uneconomical use of our time, although it was intellectually very stimulating. Sometimes, more usually now, editors will divide up for a first read amongst them according to their areas of more or less expertise, obviously, and interest. The editors decide what they will send out for review. Right? This is surprising to many authors, but not all articles get sent out for review. Right? Your article may just not make the first cut. Right? The editors may read it and say, no, you know, it's not up to standard, it's not the kind of thing that's appropriate for my journal, you know, I'm not going to send it out for review. If it's a serious piece of academic work, and usually it's very clear to editors what has come out of a PhD as well, they will send it out for review. We used to send always pieces that were clearly a first article from somebody's PhD, even if we weren't sure if it was going to make it to publication in the end. But the part of being a journal editor is an obligation to the community of, you know, getting work out there, making sure that junior scholars get good feedback from experts in the field on their work. So the editors will decide if they send your work out to referees. Right? Why do we not send everything to referees? Because we have a limited pool of referees and they have limited patience. Right? Many of you have reviewed articles for journals. And if you're like me, sometimes you will open an article and think, why the hell did the editor send me this? It's obviously never going to be published. It's no good. They're trying my patience with this. It's a waste of time, right? And if that journal editor sends me 3 things like that, or 2, I will say to them, you know what, I haven't got the time. I'm sorry, I'm not going to review this for your journal, and I'm going to stop reviewing for that journal because they're not sending me anything interesting to read, right? So, you know, I'm sure that everybody in the room only sends their best, honed, most excellent work out, and it will all get published, right? But the amount of times that people send, for example, a conference paper to a journal in the expectation that it's going to get published, it's not, right? It's the start of an article. It's not a finished article. So editors decide they're the first filter, yeah? And as I said, most editors really do try and help promising young scholars, right? Particularly. It's very important for people to get feedback. What then happens? Articles are then sent normally to 3 reviewers, sometimes more even. Once I had an article of my own reviewed by 5 people, which I thought was a bit excessive since they all wanted me to do completely different things with the article, but usually more than 2. Why more than 2? Because if one disappears and the editors don't then get 2 reviews that they can count on, so they are also making a strategy, right, to ensure that they get enough good reviews from people whose opinion they trust in the field. Reviewers, how many people in here have done reviews, reseñas for journal articles? Few of you, yeah. Okay, you know that the reviewers ask to do that within 2 months normally, yeah? And we sometimes meet that deadline and we sometimes don't, right? And then they start sending us emails saying, have you done this review? We're still waiting for your review. Please could you send it to us? And so part of the reason that these things take a long time is not because the editors are bullies and they hate you and they've ignored your article. It's because they're chasing somebody else to tell them what they think of your article. Lots of people, I'm always amazed at the generosity of colleagues, do reviews, and they do a lot of reviews. Right? I do at least 1 or 2 a month. Right? Other people do more. It's a lot of investment of time, and it's usually not rewarded by anybody. It's not in any of these evaluation systems. It's not something, but if it doesn't happen, none of us get to publish. Right? So it's terribly, terribly important. The worst is people who say that they will do the review and then they disappear off the map completely and never reply, right? Because then I, as an editor, have said, okay, I've got 3 people to review that article on 16th century religion in Querétaro, which is difficult to find. It's a small field, right, to find people to review. And then they disappear. And I don't realize that they're not going to get that review to me until we are 2 months into the process. And then I need to find somebody else to do me a review. And I can't say to the next person, do it for me in a week. So when something, if you're lucky, might have taken 2 months, maybe 3, it can take 6, sometimes 8, sometimes a year, right, to get the reviews back, right? Editors will not publish without reviews, peer review. That's the whole point of peer review journals, right? So they have to have the evaluation that they trust. And all those things slow the process down. Sometimes the editors will be honest and keep you up to date on that, right? Most times they won't tell you if there's a glitch in the system, right? Maybe because I am a former editor, I kind of can sometimes ask my colleagues and say, you've been sitting on my article for a very long time, what's happened? And they'll say, you know, we're just having such problems with one of the reviewers. Right? And then when the review comes back, even though they're anonymous, sometimes I can guess who the reviewer is and think, yeah, you should have done that quicker, but people are busy. So that's what's going on, that's what's happening with your article on the inside, right? Then the editors need to read the reviews, right? And they need to discuss them between the editorial team, right? So that also takes time, right? That may take another month for them to find the time to do that. Because editors of journals, I mean, increasingly because it is such a time-consuming, under-rewarded aspect of academia, more and more it's emeritus professors or people who are retired who are editing journals because younger colleagues just cannot do teaching, research, publishing, and editing journals. You sacrifice part of your career by doing those kind of public service things. I still think of it as public service. Maybe not everybody thinks of it as public service. Obviously, it builds your career and your reputation too, and it's wonderful as an editor to be able to survey a field. It's a huge, huge benefit and privilege of editing. If we like your article, right, we've read the reviews, one might be tougher than another, but generally they'll all say, okay, we think this is, you know, publishable, but they need to do A, B, C, and D. We will then send you what is known in the trade as a revise and resubmit, which says, we like your article, we're sending you the reviewers' opinions on it, we would like you to pay attention to their comments, and you normally are given a specific amount of time to resubmit your article. Right? Round about 3 to 6 months, I would expect. Sometimes it's hard to read the reviews. Right? What do they want? What do you do if the reviews seem to be taking you in different directions and they're wanting different things? I'll say something about that in a moment. But in terms of the mechanics, you do the revisions, you send it back to the editors. The editors then send it out again to the same reviewers, right? So they read the second submission. And sometimes they will say, yeah, this is great, it's fine, they did everything I asked, I think it's a much better article now, it's publishable. And sometimes they will say, you know what, it still needs this, and you know, and then it will go, then they'll come back to you again, and that's called a second revise and resubmit. That says, we think it's better, but you still need to do this. At which stage some people say, you know what, I'm so fed up with this process, I'm just gonna go and publish it somewhere else. Now, you know, if you can guarantee you can publish it somewhere else, then maybe that's okay. But, you know, I would say that that's now normal, that things go out 2 or 3 times. Right? Sometimes I'm asked to read something that I've reviewed for the 3rd time before I sign off on it. Okay. Sometimes the editors may make a decision on the 3rd submission without sending it back. Right? It depends on the journal and their policies. Okay, I want to say something about understanding readers' reviews. When you get them, make yourself a cup of tea or coffee, sit down, read them, put them away, and do not read them again till the next day. You will be angry when you read the reviews of your work, often, right? Even if they're very nice reviews. One of my PhD students who was lucky enough to publish in the Journal of Latin American Studies, and she got the first review she'd ever had on a journal article of hers. She worked on the police in Panama. And they were really nice reviews. I know, I see a lot of really nasty reviews as an editor, and these were really nice reviews. She was furious, incandescent with rage. Right? It's normal to react defensively when we get criticism of our work, particularly when we don't know who's giving the criticism, right? It's anonymous, right? Because it's anonymous, it may mean that people don't couch it in language that you would hope that colleagues would use when they're critiquing each other's works. And that's also a convention of not just language, but of place, right? I know that for example, my colleagues from Argentina, if there's anyone from Argentina in the room, often, you know, academic criticism are a lot more direct and than, say, it is in Mexico, where we're still critiquing. It's just a different way of framing a critique, right? So think about that also in the language of the reviews, right? You can acknowledge receipt, right? So if they send you the article, the reviews, if it's not in one of these Scholars One systems, you can say, thank you, I've received the reviews, many thanks. Right? Do not send your reaction about the reviews to the editors. Right? Don't. They don't want it straight away. Take time to reflect on the comments. Right? You may very well not agree with all of them. I'm sure you won't agree with all of them. I am often very irritated by many of the comments that I get on my own work, and I have to admit that often when I've done the revisions and reworked the article, they do improve the work, right? And it's not always evident to me at the beginning of that process that they necessarily will. So treat it as a learning process. We're never too old to stop learning about how to improve our work. You will have international experts in your field reading your work. That's a huge, huge plus of publishing in good journals, right? Even if they don't publish you in the end, you have had feedback from people that are at the top of their field helping you to improve your work. As I say, you might not always agree with all their points, but it does normally help improve it. And you won't know that until you actually sit down and start to revise the article, right? What do you do if your journal article is rejected? If it's rejected, first off, right, without even going out for review, it means that either it just wasn't up to the standard of the journal that you sent it to, or that it was the wrong kind of piece for that journal. So you need to think again about, either you do more work on it or you send it to somewhere else. If it's rejected after a revise and resubmit, that's more irritating, and but that also happens, right? Quite a lot. But if your article is rejected, it doesn't mean that it's rubbish, right? It just means that that journal doesn't want to publish it for either the reasons the editors identify or the editors with the peer reviewers. So you need to persist, right? And that's what I said at the beginning about having a publishing strategy when you rank the journals, right? So go for the best, the most difficult one first, right? be realistic about that. Take advice from other people about, if they really think your work is of such standard that it's worth trying to publish it in those, but make a list. And if you don't get it to the first one, well then send it to the next one down. Right? Don't send the same article to 2 different journals at the same time. You can't do that. Right? You must send it to one first, and then it goes through the process, and then if they don't want to publish it, only then can you dust it down and send it to another journal, right? Why? Is because there are usually not that many international experts in a particular field. So if I've sent my article to Cultural Anthropology and the Journal of Latin American and Caribbean Anthropology at the same time, it's going to go to often some of the same reviewers who are going to say, hang on, I saw this article last month because I got it sent from that journal. Right? Now most of these online systems make you tick a box that says, I, doy fe that I have not submitted this article anywhere else, right? And I've only submitted it to you. So that can be really, really irritating sometimes, particularly if you've sent first off to a very difficult to publish in journal and you have to wait and wait and wait and go through the process, and in the end it doesn't get published and it's added another year and a half onto the process of getting you published, which is why think about a publishing strategy, right? If you're in the middle of a PhD and you know that you really need one good article to help you, get a postdoc, then maybe the first article you publish is going to be in the B or C rather than the A, right? And the A is going to be the one you publish once you've got the postdoc. Right? So think about those things too. What to do if you get conflicting reviews? And that often happens, right? That usually it can be sometimes that people want you to add more in, and you've really struggled to meet the word deadline, and then the reviews come back and they say, we want more literature on this and we want them to cite that, and so it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Sometimes it may be that they want you to take it in 2 quite different directions, right? These days, normally the editors, if they have conflicting reviews, will write you a letter that says, these are the reviews. The main points that we think that the 3 reviewers are in accordance with or agree on is that you need to do this, this, and this. So they're sending you a very clear signal there in a letter like that says, if you don't do these 3 things, they're going to reject your article, right? But there may be other things that you're asked to do that not necessarily you have to. Most editors will give you some kind of guidance about that. Again, resubmission, take time to do the resubmission, take time to rework the article, obviously not months and months and months, but, again, don't just do it in a day because, these are substantive comments and they're not just minor things usually. And they're an opportunity to think about how you would improve the piece. And that's, I think, what I would emphasize about journal publishing, right? It's not just that you finish a good article and it goes straight into print, right? It's a learning process of feedback, of honing your work, of improving it, and then it will get published, right? So, and then most journals ask you to write a letter when you resubmit, explaining what you did and how you responded to the reviewer's requests, right? So if there was something that the reviewers asked you to do that you didn't do or you didn't want to do because it wasn't, you think they didn't necessarily understand what you were trying to do with the article, or that this wasn't particularly relevant, or maybe that body of debate wasn't so relevant, then you need to explain that. So you say, I thought all of the suggestions were extremely helpful. That should usually be the first phrase in your letter. And then you say, and I have done this, this, and this. I restructured section 1. I included more references on this debate. I'm very grateful to reviewer 2 for bringing this piece of work to my attention. And then you may say, however, reviewer 3 had asked me to add a section on da-da-da-da-da, And, you know, I think that actually I've responded to the main criticism in this way, or sometimes you have to say because of space requirements I didn't reference all this body of literature, but I've referenced the main thing. So you need to explain what you did, right, to them. Lastly, final submissions. As I said, the final submission, this is when they've said, yep, great, it's done, we accept it, we're going to publish your article, you know, send us the very final, you know, that needs to be scrupulous, the last one you send. It means that if they have footnotes, you do not send them an article that has endnotes. If they use Harvard's referencing system, you stick to it, and really carefully, right? Really, because that will mean, you know, that whoever's reading your work, it's smooth to read, right? They're not reading it with a red pen in their hand, thinking I've got to change these things. Then it will get edited, and it will get sent back to you, and you will have a chance to respond to the editing amendments that are made to it. It gets copy edited then. Once you get proofs, galeras, you must respond to those really quickly, right? Normally it's hell because they want you to do it within 4 days, 5 days, 2 weeks max. You must prioritize that because otherwise it may mean the difference between your article getting published in May and your article getting published in December, right, if you miss the publishing schedule. Nowadays, most of the journals, because they're all publishing online, they have something called early view, which means that your article may be coming out in 2017, but if it's gone through the copy editing process and it's ready, they have a place on their website where they're announcing the articles that are going to come out, and it's effectively published because it's published online, even though the date it will come out will be the next year. So that's a good thing for all of us. And then the last thing to say is publicizing your article, right? Increasingly, we're all expected not only to do the research and do the thinking and write and publish, but we're also supposed to be self-publicists too, right? And get our work out there. So, listservs, professional associations, your departmental websites, alumni newsletters, social media, academia, edu, whatever it is that you're using, get your article circulated. I should say that does not mean that you photocopy it or download the PDF that Cambridge University Press has given you and give it to all and sundry, because you've signed a copyright agreement, right? And that means that you cannot duplicate that work, right? Okay, you need to check with the copyright agreement that you will sign, and you need to look at the fine print on that. But normally you can put the last set of proofs on your personal website, with a message, a rider that says this, you know, article is due to appear in the Journal of Latin American Studies, issue 34, volume, whatever, right? But you cannot circulate that, right? Because Cambridge University Press or Duke University Press or whoever is publishing that journal is counting on the subscriptions and the money that they're going to make from the journal, right? So I know it's the conventions are very different in different places, right? But copyright is really a serious question. And then getting your article referenced by other people, right? That's also a complicated game in academia, not always a hugely ethical one. I'll reference you if you reference me, but you do want people that are going to be interested in what you've published to read you, right? So, for example, I'm part of a scholars network that work on Guatemala, and they send out a bulletin, and in their bulletin, which is an email bulletin, it says, you know, our member so-and-so has just published a really interesting looking article in this journal. And they just put the title, right? And then, of course, I've got to go and look for it and hope that my library has a subscription to it and all of those things. But it's a way of publicizing, right, the article. So don't think that you just get it published and that's it. Right? If you have an email signature, so when you reply to people and at the bottom of your email it says, Marcus Jones, postgraduate student, Department of Philosophy, UNAM, you can put underneath that, read my latest article, or read my article such, and then you have a link to the site of the journal, right? Book publishing, publishers expect us to do this now, right? They expect us to do talks. I mean, every time you publish a book now, you have to fill in sort of 10 pages of how you're going to publicize the book, where you're going to be speaking. Will you do a book tour? Can you do radio? Do you do Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? I don't know what else. We have to publicize our own work, right? I know that might not sit so easily with some of us, particularly that grew up in a different system, but it's important to get it out there, right? And, and it was really hard to get your journal article published, so you should be proud of it and blow your own trumpet for a while as well. Okay, I don't know how long I've gone on for because I haven't got a watch with me up here, but I'm going to stop and leave it open to you for questions.
Una pregunta muy inocente de la cual sé la respuesta y sin embargo la pregunto. ¿Pagan por los artículos?
¿Cómo? ¿Pagan?
¿Pagan por los artículos?
No.
Nunca.
Nunca. No. No. No.
¿Por qué no? ¿Cuál es la lógica?
¿Por qué nosotros como journals no pagamos a ustedes como autores? Yo más bien diría, yo publico, bueno, ya no publico el journal, pero si fuera uno de mis colegas, piénsame como colega masculino, ¿no? Diría, pues, tú quieres publicar en mi revista, y mi revista tiene un alcance global, es lo mejor en mi campo, tú deberías de pagar a mí, más bien, ¿no? O sea, el favor... si lo pensamos en términos de economía de favores, que no quiero pensarlo así, pero efectivamente, te ayuda a publicar en un buen journal, es crítico para tu carrera, ¿no? Publicar en un buen journal es tal vez lo más importante en términos de tus publicaciones que vas a hacer para tu carrera, ¿no? Si hay dinero de por medio, hay muchísima duda sobre si este peer review process realmente es un proceso. Si yo puedo pagarte a ti como editor para que me publiques, pues ¿qué garantía tiene alguien de que el trabajo sea bueno, ¿no? Y más bien, o al revés, o sea, no debe de haber dinero de por medio en estos procesos, ¿no? Sería lo peor, ¿no? Que pudiera pasar, ¿no? A veces si es una conferencia o una publicación como un libro, sí se paga, ¿no? Un honorario por un paper, ¿no? Pero eso es muy diferente a publicarlo en un journal.
Thanks, Doctor. The conference blew my mind. Thank you.
Well, I hope.
yeah, in the good way. I have a question. I just finished my bachelor's.
Okay.
And I thought if I'm at a disadvantage for publishing an article or something, because I'm not a doctor or a postgraduate student.
It depends very much on where you would be looking to publish. And, let's say I don't know what your discipline is, but imagine you're a historian and you work on the Mexican Revolution, right, which is a huge and prestigious and erudite and large field. It is unlikely that in an undergraduate degree you will have done enough work to be able to publish in something like Hispanic American Historical Review, which tends to publish people's work that has been done for years and is the outcome of a PhD process, right? But there may be other places and other journals that do publish students' work. So I wouldn't discourage you from publishing your work. I would say look for a journal outlet where they're publishing work that looks like yours, that's similar to yours. Yeah. I am often pushing my master's students here at CIESAS to publish journal articles from their master's degrees, right? Because they do very good work. Some of the good masters are better than the bad PhDs, and they should publish it. And they often don't, because they don't feel that they quite have enough confidence and they need to be doctor before they can publish. That's not, not always the case at all. So it depends on what, where, and again, going back to that advice at the beginning, think of a publishing strategy, map your field, right? Think about what might be a good outlet for your work, who would be interested in your work, yeah, it's increasingly, I mean, when I did my PhD, which was a long, long time ago, we weren't necessarily expected to have 2 journal articles by the time we went on the job market, right? Now, everybody usually has to have 2 journal articles before they go on the job market.
Thank you.
¿Les dio miedo? Pero pues no es para asustarse, pero sí es para pensarlo como una parte fundamental de lo que hacemos como académicos, ¿no? Porque mucho de lo que hacemos como académicos, o sea, hay 1000 formas de llenar el tiempo, ¿no? Está la docencia. Si uno tiene mucha obligación con la docencia, lógicamente eso toma mucho tiempo. Luego hay conferencias, está pláticas, está ir a conferencias aquí y allá. O sea, es posible pasar un semestre entero sin escribir a veces, ¿no? Entonces es muy importante priorizar el tiempo para escribir, y es muy importante tener una estrategia de publicaciones que incluya journals, ¿no? No es que yo quiero fetichizar a los journals, pero el peer review, la evaluación por pares, sí tiende a ser lo más riguroso, ¿no? Por lo tanto, uno aprende más de ese proceso, le beneficia a uno en su trabajo, aunque tal vez es un golpe duro al inicio, pero muchas veces los comentarios más incisivos que uno recibe sobre su trabajo es lo que ayuda a mejorarlo, ¿no? A lo largo de los años, y por el simple hecho de la divulgación que tienen las revistas indexadas. ¿Ustedes aquí utilizan Redalic? ¿Sí? O sea, Redalic es fantástico, a una base de datos de acceso abierto de todas las revistas indexadas con full text, texto entero de América Latina. Es una innovación fantástica, qué bueno que CONACYT lo apoya y ayuda muchísimo a la difusión de nuestro trabajo. Entonces, por ejemplo, Desacatos, que es la revista de CIESAS, está en Redalic, está indexada, y lo veo referenced, ¿no? O sea, la gente en otros idiomas hace referencia a eso. ¿Por qué? Porque pueden encontrarlo, ¿no? Pueden encontrarlo. Luego muchas veces nos quejamos de que pinches norteamericanos que nunca citan a nosotros, pues tienen que poder encontrar el trabajo, ¿no? Y si está en revistas indexadas, que mandan los índices a las bibliotecas, ¿no? Se puede encontrar los trabajos, ¿no? Si no, es difícil. Yo, por ejemplo, voy seguido a Colombia tienen una academia extraordinaria, publicaciones en mi campo local fantástico, muy difícil conseguir los libros, ¿no? Entonces tengo que ir físicamente, buscar los libros, ¿no? Las revistas son muy buenas, ¿no? Las revistas no necesito ir a Bogotá para comprarlos, los puedo conseguir desde mi casa en línea, ¿no? Entonces, les digo eso en términos de citas de su trabajo. Si publican en una revista indexada con una buena estrategia de divulgación que todos tienen que tener, más gente va a leerlos.
Ok, ¿alguna otra pregunta, comentario? Bien, pues le agradezco a la doctora Rachel la plática, conferencia que tuvo a bien brindarnos acá y orientarnos acerca de este largo y sinuoso camino que es la aventura de publicar, pero al final es el producto más genuino del trabajo en la academia. A los que asistieron a través del canal de YouTube les agradezco su presencia y audiencia, y a ustedes que están presentes acá, si todavía no firmaron el registro, les haremos llegar, bueno, les pido que lo hagan y les haremos llegar su constancia de que estuvieron presentes en este taller. Les agradezco su presencia, muchas gracias a Cambridge University Press.